We acknowledge the traditional owners of this continent and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. Don't know which Indigenous nation you're in? Find out at the link.
Oh, hi there. I'm standing on the Lockhill to Snowtown Road here in South Australia, where 100 years ago to the very day, depending on when this is broadcast, my then 76-year-old great-great-grandfather, returning home from the Snowtown pub, fell asleep, accidentally set himself on fire when his pipe fell out of his mouth, and perished in what one newspaper described as a grim tragedy. Sure, it's funny now, but I wonder if back in 1920 he hadn't had so much to drink at the Snowtown Hotel and so hadn't fallen asleep or been as flammable, my now 176-year-old great-great-grandfather would be alive today to give me a lift. The main question is, do we drink too much? Well, obviously, if you've burned yourself to death, you should definitely cut back a little, but what about that grey area in between the first glass and self-immolation? Personally, I don't understand alcohol. I just don't get it. It tastes funny and I'm not very good at it. But my children are approaching drinking age, so what advice can I give them about drinking if I don't understand it?
Hello and welcome to AOD Media Watch's first ever webinar. For those not familiar with TLAs or three-letter acronyms, AOD is an acronym for alcohol and other drugs. My name's Dr. Stephen Barratt and I'm a psychologist and senior lecturer at Edith Cowan University. I'm also one of the founding members of AOD Media Watch. AOD Media Watch is an unfunded collective of rogue researchers, clinicians and journalists who volunteer their time to advocate for better media reporting on AOD-related issues. ABC kindly asked us if we'd run this webinar to continue the conversation about Australia's relationship with alcohol following the screening of a three-part documentary on the Source. The series really highlighted how alcohol is a colourful thread that's deeply woven into the fabric of Australian society. I think Australia's Facebook status for alcohol would be it's complicated. Since officially launching in 2017, AOD Media Watch has published critiques of almost 100 news stories. We've developed guidelines for journalists, consumers and commentators. We've even had ABC's Media Watch report on 2 of our stories, yet not one of our pieces has focused on alcohol. Perhaps this is because, unlike the reporting of illegal drugs, the media do such a fantastic job of reporting on alcohol-related issues. Or it's more likely due to a disproportionate focus by the media on the harms of illegal drugs. And this is supported by the findings of research conducted both here in Australia and also overseas. Typically, when the media do examine alcohol, the focus is on a sporting star whose behaviour has been considered somewhat morally questionable, or a politician enjoying a beer poured from a tap after a period of COVID, after a break from COVID lockdown. Given that alcohol contributes to more mortality and morbidity in Australia than all of the illegal drugs combined, it's curious that there are less pieces like On the Source emerging in the media. And while there has been the odd story about a journalist's experience in coming clean about how alcohol is so deeply entrenched within the culture of Australian journalism, it's through describing their own break from drinking, including, in fact, one of our panellists tonight. There's mostly an absence of reporting about the increasing impact of alcohol on the health of Australians. In the final episode of On the Source, McAuliffe explores the future of Australia's relationship with alcohol. Tonight, we'd like to extend this conversation by exploring what role the media plays in Australia's current relationship with alcohol and how this might change so that Australia develops not only a healthy relationship with alcohol, but also other drugs. To do this, we've assembled a panel of experts in journalism, public health, and alcohol and other drug use issues. Now, I'd like let I'd like to let everybody watching know that we want this to be an interactive conversation, and I'd encourage you to type your questions into the comments section of YouTube. I'll do my best to direct these questions to the panel as we go, and there'll be an opportunity at the end for a bit of a Q&A as well. Could I now ask that the panel each introduce themselves, starting with Julie?
Hi, Steve. Thank you, and hi, everyone. So my name is Julie Dare. I'm a public health academic in the School of Medical and Health Sciences at Edith Cowan University. My research focuses on the social context to health and health behaviours such as alcohol use. And much of my research has focused on alcohol use amongst middle-aged and older women and older people more generally. So we think of, from a public health perspective, we think of drinking as a health behaviour, but of course it's also a very social behaviour as well that's influenced by the setting and the social environment in which people drink. And that's the area that my research focuses on. Over to you, Kayt.
Thank you, Julie. I'm a lecturer in journalism at Curtin University, and I'm also site coordinator of a publication called junctionjournalism.com, or The Junction, and that brings together the best student journalism from 25 universities across Australia and New Zealand. So it's a place where experimental journalism is being aired, and where the sort of journalism that we might end up talking about, like how can journalism be different and better, we're starting to explore that there as well, especially through a collaboration with the Constructive Journalism Institute, or the Constructive Institute, which is about looking at more solutions-focused journalism as opposed to journalism that is just, highlighting horrific things. So that's where I come from there. I've also worked as a journalist and as a counsellor in a residential drug rehab, and that certainly shaped my thinking about drug-related harm. So, over to you, Flip.
Hi, I'm Flip. I'm here. I'm a bit of a unicorn, I guess, because I'm a journalist who gave up alcohol. Puts me in the minority of my esteemed industry colleagues. I actually stopped drinking more than 18 months ago now, and I wrote a year-long series about the experience for the ABC. Before that, I'd been drinking since my early teens. It was a really interesting journey to undertake, and got me thinking a lot about my relationship with alcohol and, where I got all my beliefs and understandings about the role it had in my life. And so I had a really interesting time writing about that for the ABC. So, yeah.
Thanks, Flip. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. I'm Monica Barratt. I hail from Castlemaine in central Victoria, and I'm also an academic researcher at RMIT University at the Social and Global Studies Centre. I'm one of the founding members of AOD Media Watch with Steve. I've worked with Steve for a really long time now, over a decade. And in my research, I'm more interested in understanding how we use prohibited psychoactive drugs and which policies and strategies should be used to best manage that. And so while alcohol isn't my main focus, it is the most widely used and most acceptable psychoactive drug in Australia. And, I don't think you can really understand psychoactive drug use without situating it within our alcohol-soaked history and trends. So, back to you, Steve.
As you can see, we have a fantastic panel with a wide range of knowledge and experience to whom you can direct your questions tonight, and we will do our best to answer them both as they come through and also at the end. Flip, I'd like to start with you, because as a journalist currently working for the ABC, you bring a unique perspective to this conversation, not only as a journalist, but like Shaun, you've used your own experience with alcohol as an opportunity to engage with the public about this topic. How's that experience informed your understanding of the way that the media report on alcohol?
I think I should mention there's probably a big difference between Shaun and I. So Shaun, really up front in the series, talked about how he didn't understand drinking. He'd never been a drinker, or certainly not for a long time. So I was kind of the opposite to him. And we came at it from slightly different perspectives. I think the media has to be sort of understood in the context of wider society. So the media is kind of like a mirror to how we live often. And it's really interesting when you quit drinking or you step out of drinking. It's only then that you really start to see how ubiquitous it is, how everywhere it is, and how strong those messages are that you have grown up with, the associations. When I started to look, I found it really sort of, I'd be at the bus stop and I'd see something like a poster on the side of the bus stop with 3 happy girls go to the races swinging a bottle of champagne. The kind of stuff that I kind of never thought I'd noticed before or seen or that had any kind of influence on me. But I realised over time the strong association that I had with alcohol and fun, or alcohol and relaxation. And I think pop culture is another thing. I was chatting to a friend the other night and I was like, have you noticed that every time someone breaks up with someone, the first thing they do is go to the bar and chat to the barman and drink loads of vodka? So there's all of these sort of subliminal messages that you kind of don't realise are around you. And I think the media is largely the same. I think journalists, not wholly, but a lot, it's known for being a drinkers industry. And I think a lot of us, I certainly didn't grow up sort of challenging any of those narratives that we held dear in Australia, like alcohol is kind of what you do at a barbecue with your mates, and it's part of our fabric, basically. I probably didn't challenge any of those notions as a journalist, or think too critically about the role that alcohol had before I gave up drinking, basically.
So it sounds like for you and for probably many people who cease drinking, it's not until you disengage from the drinking culture that you can actually see the drinking culture. And, in one of the first episodes of On the Sauce, Shaun spoke with Australian actor Jack Thomas about the role he played in the 1975 movie Sunday Too Far Away, which is, was another way of trying to expose people to that culture, but a very difficult for people to take on board. And I believe we've got a clip that we can throw to.
Of what the pub meant and to a certain extent still means in certain areas in our society.
What about you, Polly?
If Sunday Too Far Away reflected the kind of Aussie pub culture we were more or less comfortable with, Wake in Fright showed audiences the dark side of Australian drinking.
This is your first film?
My first feature film, yeah.
A school teacher finds himself stranded in the outback, where the quintessential Australian pursuits of drinking, shooting and loving combine to terrifying effect.
Now, were you aware that it was going to be that nightmarish as a film?
It's interesting, Shaun. It still doesn't strike me as nightmare.
Oh, is that right? Maybe that's just my take on it.
No, I can see that it struck a lot of people as being nightmarish. People walked out of the theatre, they left in droves saying, that isn't us. But of course it is us.
Something? 4 more and 4 double whiskies. Right.
I think audiences watching Wake in Fright had the unsettling feeling that this was accurate, and that's probably what it was.
Oh, yeah.
Even though the objection was, we're not like that, the fear that they had was that
we are like that. Yeah.
To me, it almost seems like not much has changed since 1975 in terms of the Australian public not really wanting to acknowledge that alcohol is a drug, and it's a drug that causes significant harm in our community. As a journalist and an academic, Kayt, how can you explain what's going on here, and how does it perpetuate the disproportionate focus by the media on drugs other than alcohol?
I think that he speaks directly to it when he says it's about community. And we kind of need to remember that the media is constantly marketing itself and constantly doing the work of saying, you want to be watching us, you want to be, we're part of your life, we're a trusted friend, come to us and watch the media we present. And one of the ubiquitous tropes that they tap into to do that is that they're cool with, having a drink with me. So they're not going to really be challenging that because they're trying to use it. They're basically bandwagoning on the idea that you drink with your buddies and you drink with us. So I think that there's actually, you quite often see it in messaging around how media markets, how news and media can even market itself to being part of someone's life. But in addition to that, there's a sense that they are, media outlets are companies that need advertisers. So where they're still tapped into that advertising model, there's perhaps a reluctance to be too critical of the companies that are buying ads. And we saw that as a reluctance for a long time to really engage in questioning tobacco, because the tobacco companies bought the big ads, and alcohol's a big advertiser. So maybe, I don't know. And I think on an individual journalism level, probably individual journalists are being horrified by me saying that and saying, no, we wouldn't let that sway us. But when it comes to the sort of subtler levels of pressure that come from higher up, it's got to be a question, especially in smaller media outlets where that financial pressure is much more real. And by real, I mean close to the bone, and the advertising department and the news department are physically closer together. You can start to see that there's some of those issues possibly playing. But apart from that, I think that, as Flip said, the media is a mirror of society, and if society is drenched in alcohol, then that's to a point that we don't question it, then the media is also not questioning it, because it's mirroring that. Like, if there are no royal commissions to be reporting on, then what are we reporting on? If there's no community outrage to report on, then what are we reporting on? So in a way, it's looking at the sort of overall apathy that we have about this issue and not really, chasing it to that, not really finding the stories to report there.
So it sounds like there's an issue in terms of whether the story is newsworthy or not, and also you're sort of speaking to the systemic issues that are broader to any given journalist. And so this is maybe a good point to bring Flip in. As a journalist yourself, what are your thoughts here?
Say that again. Sorry, you dropped out for a second there.
So, Kayt was sort of talking about the systemic issues that are a barrier to the media reporting on alcohol-related harms, and it also doesn't really seem to be newsworthy at a theoretical level. It's so deeply embedded within Australian society. If you're not a non-drinker, you don't realise this.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I certainly don't feel, definitely the ABC, there's no pressure not to report on these things. And I don't, and sure, I think advertising must play a role in part, but, individual journalists are always interested in doing a story. I think one of the problems that we have is not so much the journalists not writing about it, is that the audience appetite for some of the messages is perhaps a little bit lower than it should be. One example that I always like to talk about is everyone will quote the line at you about red wine being good for your heart. But very few people will quote that research that came out in 2018 that the Lancet put out, which said that no amount of alcohol is safe. And I think people largely, don't want to hear some of those messages because they think that, I definitely have had responses where people are a bit like, oh, come on, leave us alone, just let us have our beer and just, don't be such a wowser. There's still that kind of attitude in Australia that is quite strong. It's an unpalatable message for people that alcohol is carcinogenic. They, and we certainly do those stories, but they tend to drop like a stone a lot of the time because people just simply don't want to hear it. So I think you've got that problem for some reason, and it's interesting that you draw the parallel with the tobacco lobby, because I thought a lot about this. We've reached the point now where it is fairly socially unacceptable to light up a cigarette, and people are well aware of the harms that are associated with smoking. We're not there with alcohol yet. And it's interesting because when you look at the links with cancer and obesity and all of that stuff that I certainly found out when I did my year off, I don't associate that stuff with alcohol. And so for whatever reason, the public health campaigns and those messages just aren't getting through to people. So I think it's more about the audience than the journalists at this point.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's so embedded within our culture. It's a normal part. We use it to celebrate, to commiserate. It's a normal part of Australian culture, and this is kind of highlighted in episode 2 when Shaun attends a book club.
Thank you.
Beck, nice to meet you.
Sean, I'm Beck.
Beck, I've got a wine.
Nice, thank you.
That's what
very
people
nice.
do when they go to book club. Is
Yes.
that right? You can put it in the cupboard. I don't know what it is.
No, we'll drink that.
Well, I did read the book. It was about a group of friends and it was associated around a family barbecue.
Joanne's joining Rebecca, Dee and Pauline to talk literature, drink wine and eat strawberries.
I didn't even bring the book.
Neither did I.
Sally didn't bring the book either.
And I've invited Dr. Sally Hunt, an alcohol researcher from the University of Newcastle.
You'd be more embarrassed if we turned up and we hadn't read it.
We hadn't read it. Well, that's fine. The other cliche that's often associated with book groups is wine.
By the time we get to book club, which may happen once a month, we sort of get together and we're actually looking forward to it because our children are driving us nuts by then.
Yeah, they do.
That's why we invented book club.
Life's just so busy. We're juggling more than what we used to, I suppose, and that's our release. And we get together with some supportive girls and we help each other through maybe just situations that we might be going through, and it's a glass of wine that helps that edge as well.
You never used to drink much, Bob.
No.
When I first met you, you didn't drink.
No.
Did I make you drink more?
With women driving Australia's wine boom, little wonder they're the prime targets for marketing. Meanwhile, the internet is full of memes proclaiming wine as mother's little helper and where children's bedtime is wine o'clock. Such images are often accused of normalising alcoholism.
We're only resorting to alcohol because it's legal. Like, let's face facts. I mean, you can go down in the morning to get a litre of milk, but you'll come back with a bottle of wine to fill a glass because, you know what, you've dropped the kids off at school, you spent 45 minutes in the morning. That's a lie. An hour and a half in the morning getting them to school and you're exhausted.
You need to cope. You need to do the things you need to do. The bad news is that when we look at what the data says, drinking to cope seems to be a predictor of that heavier, more problematic drinking. We know that lately we've seen, particularly mums in their 40s, we're seeing a narrowing of the gender gap. So traditionally men have drunk more than women. Historically it's been kind of double. Men drink twice as much as women. And women are out in the workforce more instead of being at home, and there's a whole range of social changes that happened, made it socially acceptable for women to do anything that men do. But the downside of that isn't publicised is that alcohol affects women differently than it affects men. When it comes to things like cancer, liver disease and other health problems, the woman's going to get sick sooner or is more likely.
Former boxer Pauline found her drinking was causing problems.
I was just hitting it and I didn't realise at the time how much damage I was actually doing. They pulled me over and I was over, I blew over and lost my licence on the spot and I was just like, what the hell? I didn't realise how much it actually affected me, alcohol, and how much... I didn't have much education, and I think that's what lacks, is that we don't have education around alcohol.
I have a great faith that people make good choices when they are given the information to make a good choice.
And the right tools.
But when it comes to alcohol, we're not given all that information in a loud and public way.
Alcohol is the legal drug that has got more consequences to it than any other drug. And it's so potent and accessible.
I mean, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle, isn't it? It's a socialised drug.
Yeah. I think close the bottle shops down to a certain amount of days throughout the week.
Well, I'm not sure that's going to be a popular petition. But...
So, Julie, from a public health perspective, what was going through your mind as you watched that clip?
Well, I think it really highlights how deeply embedded alcohol is in Australian women's social and cultural practices, the sorts of things they do in their everyday lives. It really resonates strongly with the research that we've done with middle-aged and older women. When they talked about alcohol, it was described as being very socially acceptable for women to drink. They described alcohol as going hand in hand with socialising. The other thing that really jumped out at me in that clip was how central alcohol is to the routines and the rituals that shape Australian women's lives. it kind of highlights, at one point, Shaun talks about alcohol as being a socialised drug. And I think that kind of comes through in that clip. So if we look at the rituals or the routines in that clip, in that book club, alcohol was being used to mark the transition between the everyday grind that mothers experience, in terms of, they talked about getting their kids to bed and getting them off to school, that transition to me time, to relaxing time. It also sets the mood. So alcohol is used to set the mood. In this case, it's conducive to chilling out and relaxing and having fun. So it's kind of like gives you permission to do that. And it also reinforces relationships among women. So it helps to sort of confirm a group identity and strengthen bonds within women's social networks. So it's a really powerful tool or powerful thing that's used among women. And those rituals are reinforced through marketing messages that Flip talked about before, and also through the sort of memes that were included in that clip, the links between alcohol and mothers and how mothers use alcohol. And those messages just reinforce this idea that alcohol, the normalisation of alcohol, that it's socially acceptable, that it's okay, that it's a part of everyday life for women, middle-aged and older women as well. And it also underpins an expectation that women will drink. And that makes it difficult for those women or people who choose not to drink, because alcohol in Australia and in many other countries as well is really synonymous with having fun, relaxing and bonding with other people.
Mm. And all of that really seems quite harmless, Julie. And, but I guess drinking goes beyond the book clubs. And anyone that's worked in a hospital will know only too well that every weekend thousands of Australians experience harm associated due to drinking too much or being the victim of an alcohol-fueled assault. In the second episode of On the Sauce, Shaun visits a major metropolitan hospital. Can we throw to that clip?
Whether it's throwing up or throwing punches, excessive alcohol consumption often ends in a mess. This is where that mess gets cleaned up. It's Friday night at the emergency department of Sydney's St Vincent's Hospital, and the staff are preparing for, as one doctor described it to me, a conveyor belt of carnage.
You're just in hospital at the moment. How much have you had to drink? You're not sure?
Alcohol is the most widely abused drug in Australia, placing a great strain on the nation's health services. It's a factor in nearly half of all fire injuries, more than 30% of murders, and 1 in 3 domestic violence incidents.
It's an ambulance. This has been triaged. Out drinking tonight with his friend, running in and out of traffic. It sounds like the four-wheel drive was going. He then stumbled in front of it, hit it, no injury, but he's vomiting profusely.
So where's Sinead?
Here at St Vincent's, they estimate that 15% of their ER admissions are alcohol-related. It's roughly the same for hospitals all over Australia. Most patients are in such a state they can't communicate with the medical staff. Nurses have to determine if they've overdosed on alcohol, drugs, or both.
He denied drug use, but we did find drugs in his pocket. So he says just alcohol.
All right, mate, you're going to have to help us a bit. Ready? Open your eyes.
Sit in this chair. Back, on the chair,
No. On this chair. On this chair. Come on. Good job.
You know what happened? Can you remember what happened next?
We know he's drunk, so it's just observation. Make sure he's safe. Send him on his way.
You're not anticipating doing any tests tomorrow morning?
No. I can see that he looks from head to toe like he doesn't have any injuries, so there would be no need to do anything. It's just making sure that people are safe when they come in like this, that they're not going to aspirate on their vomit or be vulnerable. We get a lot of young girls, so they're not vulnerable on the street by themselves where anything could happen.
Yeah. You were here before the lockout laws came. And what was it like then?
Oh, mayhem. Pretty much every cubicle would be an intoxicated head injury, run over by a car or various injuries. It definitely has quietened down since lockout.
Because I wondered whether it was wearying for you to see this all the time.
I mean, sometimes it does get wearying, but it's our job. That's what we're here. We're here to help people, so this is part and parcel of it.
Do you know where you are at the moment?
Absolutely.
Whereabouts?
In the hospital.
It's alarming to think of all the hospital resources being allocated to so many people suffering what are essentially self-inflicted wounds. And as a parent, it's doubly confronting. It's profoundly uncomfortable and depressing imagining your own children getting so blind drunk they end up this vulnerable and incapable. It's kind of sad, isn't it? Being reduced to the level of a baby and having to be looked after by people. This doesn't help me understand why at all. It's just weird and sad and absurd and surreal. It doesn't look like fun. It doesn't look funny. It's horrible.
Streaming was quite sensational. It was people being presenting at emergency departments, being treated for alcohol intoxication. It's what anybody who's worked in a hospital sees every Friday, Saturday night. And the footage is quite confronting. It's quite sensational. So as I'm not a journalist, but to me that seems to make a good news story. Kayt, why isn't this a good news story?
I'm really glad it's not a good news story, because it would be a kind of horrific sort of journalism, incredibly voyeuristic, incredibly insensitive, to be contacting, to be chasing people to tell a story when they're incapacitated, when they should be being as honest and open as they can to the medical staff around them, when there may be legal issues going on that are yet to be revealed. Like, they may be victims, they may be perpetrators of various crimes that are going on because there's been some impairment and some issues, some drama, some injury. So I don't think that is a good place for a journalist to be, because we don't want journalism to be interfering with the justice process. We certainly don't want journalism to be interfering with a medical process. And I think as a journalist, how much story could you get out of that anyway? Oh, here's a person, they're being sick. That, you don't necessarily want to be saying any more than that. And I just don't think there's all that much story to be told there. And where there is crime, those stories come out later in due course through the court cases, as they should. But, I would be a little bit horrified to see that becoming like grist for the journalistic mill. But what do you think, Flip?
Sometimes I think, showing it can have shock value, I think sometimes it's really hard in those circumstances. Often people don't see that sort of behaviour, or if they're in that condition themselves, they don't actually see the kind of impact that has because they're unconscious. And I think it sort of demonstrates the burden that this kind of thing actually places on the health system. I think it's important stories to tell, to be honest. It's uncomfortable viewing, and I don't think we should shy away from that, because I think one of the things that I found about being really drunk and being really incapacitated is that we're very quick to move on and downplay those sorts of behaviours. And if you've had a really big night out and you've ended up sort of throwing up and you've been hungover in bed all day, or you tripped over and you hurt your knee or something, people tend to laugh it off. And I think actually sort of showing that in full technicolor and saying, actually, this is not just kind of something that you did to yourself, but it's something that is actually quite a big burden on society, is really important. And I think there's sensitive ways to do it.
So in many respects, I understand what Kayt's saying. There are issues in terms of, you don't want journalists going onto the floor of emergency departments. At the same time, though, as you're saying, Flip, if we're not telling those stories, people are able to shy away from the harms, and it kind of minimises potentially the public's perception of the harms associated with alcohol. And so, Monica, as someone who conducts research into the harms associated with not only alcohol but other drugs as well, what impact do you think this lack of public awareness about what sort of goes on a Friday, Saturday night in an emergency department has on alcohol-related harm, but also the use of other drugs?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It's been interesting hearing people think, and Flip was mentioning this idea of the lack of awareness. I'm not sure if there's a full lack of awareness out there that these things happen. But I think, as Professor Kunch pointed out in the documentary, the issue is that the negative repercussions aren't as immediate as the positive repercussions. When, I liked his analogy. He said, if every time you had a drink you got hit on the hand with a hammer immediately, then you'd probably stop doing it, right? So, for some of us, we just like the positive effects too much to actually stop despite the delayed negatives, even if those negatives are really bad negatives, like some of the stuff that we saw in the hospital, or even in terms of the liver transplant patients that we saw in the first episode, where their chronic alcohol use over many decades caused, has basically nearly killed them. But there is still this pull to back to drinking. So I think we've also mentioned earlier this idea of cognitive dissonance, and this idea that you think of this problem as something that happens to other people. And I think that attitude is something that we all share, and it was something that was put out on a number of occasions throughout this documentary, this idea that alcohol is fine in moderation, and it's only some at-risk people who should avoid it. And I think it's particularly useful, this idea, for alcohol marketing and the alcohol industry, is this idea of, drink responsibly. This pushes it back on the individual. So, yeah, that was interesting that came out. I think as to the question of how these alcohol news stories relate to our reporting of illegal drugs, yeah, there's a massive contrast. And I think Steve mentioned earlier that AOD Media Watch, even though there is an A in the AOD Media Watch, it is A for alcohol, we've very rarely done stories, if any stories, on alcohol until now. And, I think that's part of this issue. And it really struck me. I mean, I knew these statistics, but I hadn't thought about it for a while in the context of COVID that we're all living in now, that, it was mentioned that 6,000 deaths per annum in Australia can be attributed to alcohol. And yet, we are we're basically stopping our entire economy to stop the spread of COVID-19, because we're anticipating that there could potentially be thousands of deaths if we didn't do that. And I imagine there would be thousands of deaths if we hadn't taken those actions. But here we are with some actions we could take to reduce the availability of alcohol, to change the culture around alcohol, which could also save thousands of deaths, but we're not prepared to look at that. Because I think, and then the other thing we do is we'll scapegoat other drugs. So we're making these stories, sensational stories, methamphetamine, heroin, MDMA, cannabis, but we're not as prepared to look at the one that's actually causing the most harm.
So just on scapegoating, Monica, the media often perpetuates this narrative of scapegoating young people. It's young people that are the problem. But the data shows that young people are drinking less than ever since we've been recording data on this in Australia. And while at the same time, middle-aged and older Australians are drinking at record levels. So maybe firstly, why are young people drinking less, in your opinion?
Yeah, I found that was a really good part of this documentary, that it didn't just focus on young people, focused across the life course, because there tends to be this stereotype in the community that it's only young people who are drinking in harmful ways. But when we look at the statistics, the people that are currently in their teens and 20s are less likely to drink compared to people the same age from the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. I have some colleagues at La Trobe University, Michael Livingston and Amy Penne, and they're leading a research project at the moment exploring why it is that young people drink less. They don't have sort of one magic answer to that. There's a number of reasons that they're exploring, and I'll just go through some of them. Some were mentioned in the documentary as well, but they're looking at how young people today tend to be more risk averse, so more worried about the future, more worried about the world, and also living in the parental home longer under more surveillance. So these things can lead to reduced drinking. People are socialising in different ways. Leisure time is different. The sort of typical working week and ending with a weekend is not necessarily as widespread as it once was. So that changes how we socialise as well. They're more worried and they're more aware of the health effects than they were decades ago, which I guess is a positive thing. And also, as mentioned in On the Sauce, the way that social media is embedded in the worlds of young people in these spaces where drinking occurs has an effect, because people are more concerned about their image and ensuring they're in control of themselves in public spheres where that, videos of them doing the wrong thing could stay there forever. And I think many of us, certainly my age, would think, well, if there were videos of what I did at that age, I wouldn't be so happy about that if they were online now. But that wasn't a thing for me in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I guess the final thing that they're looking at is that it just seems to not be quite as cool as it once was. Doesn't have quite as much cultural, and perhaps also because there's more diverse cultures, subcultures and mini subcultures that you can access now if you're a young person growing up. And we saw an example of that in the final episode with the straight edge community that has been around for a long time, but being able to access those communities and identify with them, and they may have different ideas about whether alcohol is a positive thing to do.
Flip, was there something you wanted to add to that?
No, I was just thinking, I found it really interesting that when I like going out dancing. I've always liked going to nightclubs and used to do it drinking. And I was quite surprised to find there's quite a huge subculture of this kind of wellness culture of people who still go out dancing and still go out clubbing, but it's done with completely dry bars. So they'll have like sacred cacao cocktails and it's all completely alcohol-free, and your body is a temple kind of thing. And, you'll wake up early in the morning and go and do some yoga. And I found that really interesting because all of the other aspects of socialising are still there, the dancing, the community, the dressing up and going out, but just not the hangover in the morning. And there's definitely, I've noticed in the last couple of years, a real kind of upsurge in that kind of thing. And the other thing that's kind of interesting, I think we're of the same vintage, Monica, but back in the day, if you didn't drink, you were kind of a bit uncool. And I feel like that's changed now. I think when people, if you're a bit younger and you say, I don't drink, it's pretty normal and people don't give you as much of a hard time. Whereas when I was a teenager, it was kind of all about going to parties and getting drunk. And if you didn't do that, you were a bit of a social outlier. So it's been interesting to watch that change over time. And I think, find your tribe and then it gets a lot easier, basically.
Recently survived breast cancer.
Every year I have a mammogram and a
day on average.
Oh, I don't know. Sometimes 6. Down at happy hour I drink more than being at home here. Yeah, so probably 6. Say 6.
6 mid-strength beers.
Not every day.
No.
If I've had a big weekend, I don't drink for a couple of days.
When you say a big weekend, what do you mean?
Well, heavy parties and everything.
Oh, really?
Yes.
73-year-old Sandy Smith recently survived breast cancer.
Every year I have a mammogram and an ultrasound and, keep up. So I've only got one more year to go and I'll have the all clear then.
New studies show that alcohol seriously increases the risk of breast cancer. Having just 3 drinks a week raises your chances by around 15%.
I'll give that toadstool a drink.
Oh, yeah.
Globally, breast cancer fatalities would drop by 10% if we simply stopped drinking alcohol.
Did you alter what you drink or how often you drink?
No.
No advice from the doctor on those lines?
Oh, I probably did.
Well, do you think you'll gradually phase it out?
No.
No?
No.
It's not a matter of principle, though. You just enjoy it.
No, I won't. No, I don't think so, unless I get really, really sick.
Do people advise you? Do people helpfully suggest to you?
No.
No? They know you?
Mm.
So they know there's no point making any suggestions.
Exactly right.
Done.
Here he comes, the man.
Nola, how are you? Let me take my glasses off. Very nice to meet you. It's all right. How do you do? I'm Sean.
I'm Liz.
Cheers.
After you, please. Come on in.
Sandy's friends have invited me for an aperitif poolside at the over-50s lifestyle village they call home.
And you're single, are you?
No, I'm married. I'm married.
What a shame. I've been married 3 times and Liz has been married 4 times.
Okay.
I didn't think we were going to get into that.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Cheers.
I guess the conversation we're having is that, there's this narrative that young people getting intoxicated are the problem, and the perpetuation of this narrative by the media prevents us from having some conversations. And some of these conversations are difficult conversations and perhaps more important conversations. For example, it's the regular use of alcohol, not episodes of intoxication, that contribute most significantly to the burden of disease in Australia, particularly among older people. Though unlike the harms associated with intoxication, these sorts of harms and the drinking patterns associated with them are less visible. So, Julie, what are the implications of the media not covering these sorts of harms?
Maybe just to backtrack a little bit, I think the media's focus on alcohol-related harm amongst young people is probably largely because young people's drinking is very much in your face. The sorts of images that were featured in the second episode of young people falling over in the street, throwing up, and the sort of things that you typically see, after Melbourne Cup, you'll see young women particularly looking very messy and staggering. That's easy for cameras to capture, for people to take a pic on their phone and then upload it to social media, and then it gets circulated through the media more broadly. So it's out there and we can see it, whereas older people's drinking almost overwhelmingly occurs in the private sphere. It occurs in people's homes or their friends' homes, or as we saw in episode 2 with the older women in the lifestyle village in Queensland, in clubhouses within retirement villages. So it's not visible, it's not out there. There's nobody taking pics and uploading them to social media. And so because of that, it tends to go under the radar, as does the harm that occurs, that is associated with older people's drinking. To come to your question, the implication is that when those images disproportionately focus on younger people in the media, what that lets older people do is really it's easier to cognitively disassociate themselves from any personal risks that their drinking might bring to them. And that kind of brings up an interesting thing, is that all population groups, whether they're young or old, tend to compare their drinking to other population groups. Most usually it's older population groups comparing it with younger population groups. And in the research that we've done with older people, that happens all the time. When they talk about problematic drinking, they're talking about younger people. They refer to the type of images that we saw in episode 2 and those images of young people looking a bit messy and throwing up and what have you. For them, that's what they view as problematic. And they say, well, that's not how I drink. We don't drink like that. Therefore, our drinking, so the implication is our drinking isn't problematic. We drink moderately or low risk. And that's the terms that they use, because they are contrasting it with those really visible images of what they view as problematic drinking. And that so also means that they can more easily brush off the harms that might come from their drinking, particularly for the women that were featured in episode 2, those older women at the retirement village. I mean, they were drinking at risk levels. And among the women that we interviewed in our research, the Australian women, 30% were drinking every day, and there was a significant proportion who were drinking at risk levels. So it wasn't just sort of 1 or 2 glasses a day. So to kind of come back to your question about when the media don't portray older people's drinking in a way that really accurately and authentically reflects where they drink and how they drink, then it reinforces their tendency to downplay the risks associated with their drinking. And it undermines public health efforts to try and raise older people's awareness of the risks of alcohol. And I think it was Monica that you mentioned before that, there is no level of alcohol that is safe. And it also undermines public health efforts to increase that sense of personal susceptibility, which is often a key element of behaviour change campaigns. Public health campaigns that try to minimise the risk. So it does have significant implications.
Can I just raise one other point as well? I have wondered a little bit, because you've got, boomer parents who they grew up in the sort of the hard drinking 80s and 90s. They cemented their drinking behaviours, and now those have carried on in the home, and they've had kids who are now in their 20s and 30s. And I have wondered, and I haven't seen much evidence of this, but I have wondered about whether those kids have grown up seeing their parents drink to unsafe levels behind closed doors, perhaps to their detriment, and they've grown up thinking, I don't really want to be like that, and maybe there's been issues that have been raised. I think that would be a really interesting conversation to have, because it kind of is interesting that there is that, as well as all the other things that Monica mentioned. There is such this generational shift that's happening, and often you'll find that people of one generation will reject the behaviours of the one that came before it. And so there is potentially something in that people are just saying, I don't want to be as unhealthy as my mum and dad when I get to that age, and I don't like what they do to themselves every night, how they drink, a bottle and a half or 2 bottles of wine before they go to bed every night. And there's certainly a lot of that going on around the country at the moment.
Yeah, there was some evidence in our research that some of the women, their adult children, were telling them that they were drinking too much.
Yeah, interesting.
You can't find your keys. You keep forgetting things, Mum. It's because you're drinking.
Right. Yeah.
They wouldn't accept that.
It's almost it's almost the younger people rebelling against rebelling. In fact, that were the explicit words that Shaun used to talk about a group of young people that had chosen to cease drinking. So I guess I'd like to close by if we could bring everybody together, because essentially there was this marketing campaign in the final episode that
they came up with this.
Yeah, they came up with this.
Hi, babe. I got you What's going on?
Come sit down, Dave.
What are you all doing here?
We're worried about you, mate.
Worried? About what? About your drinking. But I don't drink much.
Dave, you hardly drink at all.
We've all noticed it, son.
The light beers after golf?
The half bottles of wine.
And not even finishing your glass.
You always remember everything that happens at the office party.
And never make a dick of yourself.
Look, son, nobody expects you to get pissed every night.
And nobody minds you having a night off now and then, love.
We've all done dry July, haven't we?
But how long since you've really got on a grog, mate? I mean, really gave it a nudge? I don't know. A few weeks, maybe.
Try a couple of years, Dave.
Who's really got the problem here?
That was kind of trying to find a way to change this narrative that we've got with alcohol. So I was hoping to ask each panelist as what you think we could do to change the narrative of alcohol and other drug use in Australian society, and what role the media might play. Maybe you could start, Julie.
Yeah, so look, I think documentaries like On the Sauce are a really good start, a really good way, particularly to get the issue of alcohol use among older adults onto the agenda. And at the moment, I don't think it's there. So in particular, the sort of images that we saw in episode 2 of those older women drinking quite heavily are a little bit confronting, I think, and they're not the sort of images that we normally see. They don't really fit those ageist stereotypes around older people, particularly in retirement villages where you might get images of, well, they play bowls and they go to knitting club and they drink cups of tea. And clearly the women that were featured in the documentary were not doing that. They were living a very different sort of life as they get older. But what I think is really important is that those scenes really highlight the social nature of alcohol use. They were very socially engaged and have a really enjoyable life, and that's really important for older people, is to be socially engaged. But those images are also really authentic, and I think they will resonate with a significant proportion of older people, older Australians. I think the other thing is that because it really highlights, because it's such a social activity, in that context, health priorities come down. They're not a concern for these people. So I think the documentaries like this really provide a good springboard to have those conversations with older people, particularly, and that's the area that I'm interested in, about their relationship with alcohol and about how much they drink and how frequently they drink.
So it seems like what sort of your take-home message is that the messaging to change the narrative needs to be very targeted towards different demographics, and it needs to be authentic. Flip or Monica, are you okay to provide your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see more focus on the positives of giving up as opposed to the negatives of, what you're missing out on. I think that surprised me so much. So to give you some context, I only ever intended to stop drinking for 1 year. And I got to the end and I sat down and I thought about it, and I thought, I've gained so much over this past year that I don't think I want to do that again. And, the stuff that I hadn't really associated with alcohol, things like energy, sleep quality, I lost weight, I have more energy to exercise, I had better focus, all of these things that sort of the slow creep over time, I felt like in total I gained more than I'd lost. And there's a lot of focus on even giving up alcohol in Australia, this sense of loss, this sense of, if you don't do it, you're going to become a social pariah. How can you go to weddings? What will you do when you go networking? So I set out to challenge all of those things, and I did every single one of the things that I did before, and I did them completely sober, and I survived. And I didn't only just survive, I had a really good time doing it, and I felt much better the next day. You never, or you very rarely see that as a message. It's kind of all about alcohol-related harms and how you're going to end up in dire straits if you do this. And I think one of the problems is that people, a bit like those images that we see of, people languishing in hospital beds and being forced to throw up because they've had a big night out. There's lots of people who will think, oh, well, I drink a bit, but I'm not that bad. I won't end up in that situation. And they tend to not see themselves in the extremes. So the messages about things like you will get cancer just don't resonate with them, because they're like, oh, that's just something that happens to other people. So if there could be, I think it'd be interesting to try a campaign that says something like, well, this is what you'll actually, if you don't drink, then you actually gain all this stuff. So yeah, who knows? Yeah. I mean, because I think the current messages aren't really working for people for all those reasons, and I do think that there needs to be a concerted effort to get messages across. You're going to have to prize alcohol out of people's cold, dead hands at the moment, is the vibe that I'm getting. People are like, I'm in the middle of a pandemic, don't take away my crutch. And I think we're going to have to do a lot of work to explain to people. Like, one thing I would say to people right now is, do you know that if you drink your way through the pandemic, the likelihood is that your anxiety and mental health problems are going to get worse potentially. But yeah, I don't think people make that association at this point.
So I think 5 following on from what Julie was saying, in addition to the narrative change, the targeting of the messaging needing to be to particular cohorts in order to change the narrative, there needs to be a shift away from focusing on the harms associated with drinking to the benefits that you get from not drinking. And as somebody who's lived in both Western Australia and Victoria, I noticed in Western Australia the tobacco campaign here when I left to move to Victoria was that every cigarette you do is doing you damage. And when I moved to Victoria, the message was every cigarette you don't have is doing you good. And that, as a former smoker or a smoker at the time, that message actually resonated better with me than the message that I should, that it's doing me harm. I think you raise a good point. Monica, is there anything? What's your sort of take-home message for tonight?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree as well with what you're saying around positive messaging and trying that for something different. I don't think the public in Australia have really thought through what might be positive about not drinking. My research is more focused on illegal drugs, and so in watching this documentary exploring the role of alcohol in Australian life, I was struck by how difficult it would be to do the same documentary on any other drug. Any of the less socially acceptable drugs in the same kind of depth. But if that were possible, if we were able to explore openly with different members of society how they use cannabis or MDMA or methamphetamine or heroin, and not in the way that we do in the documentaries that do exist, they tend to be, here's this person, they've hit rock bottom, they've recovered, and there's particular tropes that are used, but how particular psychoactive substances are embedded in people's social lives, how they are approached, how the downsides are managed. I think it could open up some public discussions about drugs and present multiple contrasting narratives. The problem, of course, is prohibition and the threat of criminal sanctions, making it more difficult to make a documentary like On the Sauce about other drugs. And, I noticed obviously in On the Sauce they had blurred out faces of people, I guess they hadn't necessarily got their consent and they were in compromising situations. But, on the other side, they were able to talk to people who were completely open about their very heavy drinking and were able to do so. I think both alcohol and other psychoactive drugs, journalists and others producing this content can make a difference by presenting multiple perspectives and stories, not just the accepted ones, the stereotypical ones, the ones that make us not so comfortable. And the more of those alternative stories that come out, I think, the more the public and politicians might be open to alternative policies and strategies to manage both alcohol and other drugs. It's probably not that simple, but it could go some way to opening up the discussion, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kayt, if I could bring you in maybe to then comment on sort of what Monica's talking about in terms of, encouraging the media to look at these different narratives and how that might change the broader narrative with regard to not only alcohol but other drugs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The media is a little resistant to being told what to do. I think it very much has to be a sort of carrot, not a stick, when it comes to changing media behaviour. Some newsrooms there's a lot of people trying to tell newsrooms what to do, and some of them have had huge success. I mean, the movement that was trying to influence the way newsrooms handled suicide and self-harm, they've done a really good job. There's also a movement about how we report violence against women, and that campaign group seeking to change newsroom behaviour has also had some good impact. So if you're looking to change editorial decisions, then there are ways to do it. There can be education campaigns. We have a lot of people approaching us as journalism educators to start talking differently about this, start raising the awareness of the young journalists who are going out into the industry. And we certainly do that. But when it comes, the other field is Julie's field of sort of health promotion and awareness of what health promotion can and can't achieve. And I think that ties in beautifully with what Flip was just saying, that, it's well known in the health promotion field that talking about positives works better than talking about negatives, that you're more likely to make people want to, eat well by saying, be healthy, be happy, than you are by saying, don't be miserable and sick. We know this, and yet it's not maybe that this is just those people who are doing a bit of this with alcohol need to do more of it. I think that there's scope to look very much at how different platforms do this. The Instagram as a platform, Twitter as a platform, there's scope here for sort of celebrities, celebrity buy-in, to be posting things like feeling fantastic at 5 a.m. yoga, so glad I didn't drink last night. That kind of celebrity messaging might start to be, but this is not editor making. If you want editorial decision making to change, then following the example of some of the people who do health promotion really well, who are like, hey, you're a newsroom, can I supply you with interesting people to tell human interest stories, with stories of, here's some statistics that demonstrate impact, because it's well known what editors are looking for. Editors are looking for impact, proximity, conflict, if possible, heaps of human interest, scale of the problem, and you tell the story using those elements, and that's how you attract an editor's attention. They're in a hurry, they're understaffed, make it easy, that kind of approach. And as I said, it's not rocket science. It's something that the Heart Foundation knows well. It's something the Kidney Foundation knows well. And events like Dry July, that's a really good one, that you pick a month, and that's the month that you focus on telling those stories in, and because it gives it a timeliness for the media to be able to attach onto. So I just think those people who are doing those things are doing well. They should do more of it. I think that Julie and Flip and Monica have raised some excellent points.
So in summary then, to sort of pull it all together, it sounds like the media can potentially be part of the solution in terms of changing the narrative, not only about alcohol, but also other drugs. And in the same way that Julie talked about the need to focus on different cohorts, the way we talk to journalists, we need to target the information in that particular cohort. And as Flip was saying, in doing so, you need to work with the carrot, not the stick. Whether it's giving people information about the benefits of not drinking versus the harms of drinking, or demonstrating the benefits of this particular story and demonstrating to editors why this particular story is going to be more newsworthy, rather than trying to beat them with a stick to focus on. It is going to eventually change the narrative. So I'd like to bring the webinar to a close.